My lectures are a lie. My calm, a performance. For years, I've held the other half of my soul in secret, a quiet Omega named Eli. Now, an arrogant Alpha student bullies him in my class, each cruelty a knife in our hidden bond. He has no idea I am their professor or their destined anchor. Episode 1: The Knife in the Song. The scent of chalk dust and impatient youth was a familiar cloak I wore every Monday. As Professor Aris Thorne, Beta, expert in socio-cultural dynamics, I stood before my lecture hall, a model of calm authority. My notes were precise, my voice measured, a steady drone designed to impart knowledge, not emotion. It was a perfect mask. Beneath it, my entire world was a single, fragile point of light in the third row: Eli. From the moment he'd shyly taken that seat weeks ago, my soul had let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding for years. Our bond, a secret, silent tether woven between a beta and an omega, hummed in the space between us. It wasn't the overwhelming possessive pull of an alpha. It was a deep, resonant understanding. Through it, I felt the quiet rhythm of his focus, the soft pulse of his anxiety when called upon, the gentle warmth of his contentment when he understood a concept. It was a private song, and I was its sole devoted listener. And then there was Leo. Leo Vantis occupied the center of the room like a king holding court, an alpha, not just in designation, but in essence. He was all sharp angles, confident smirks, and a gravitational pull that demanded attention, even when he wasn't speaking, which today he was. So you're saying the entire thesis is based on a text you can't even properly cite? Leo's voice, smooth as oil and just as slick, cut through my lecture on ethnographic methodology. He wasn't looking at me, he was turned in his seat, his gaze a physical weight pressing down on Eli, who had just given a halting but perfectly accurate summary. I felt it before I saw it, a flinch in the bond, a sudden discordant note in Eli's song, a spike of shame, hot and acidic. I watched Eli's shoulders curl inward, his fingers whitening around his pen. The addition was specified in the footnote, Eli murmured, his voice barely a whisper, meant only for Leo. A footnote no one can read, Leo laughed, a sound that drew echoing snickers from his orbit of followers. He reached over, and with a casual cruelty that my jaw clenched, he flicked the corner of Eli's open notebook. The pages fluttered. Maybe if you spoke up or wrote legibly, people would take you seriously, Omega. The word wasn't just a designation. In his mouth, it was a weapon. Omega. Delivered with a dismissive, venomous twist, a public relegation. The bond screamed with Eli's humiliation, a sickening wave that crashed into me, tightening my chest. My own pen threatened to snap in my grip. The mask of Professor Thorne slipped. I could feel a cold, unprofessional fury rising in my throat. "Mr. Vantis," I said, and my voice was lower, colder than I intended. The room's attention snapped to me. "The floor is for scholarly debate, not personal commentary. Eli's point was correct. Perhaps redirect your considerable energy towards formulating your own argument." Leo turned his head slowly, that infuriating smirk still playing on his lips. His eyes, the color of storm clouds, met mine. There was no remorse there, only a challenge to my authority, a beta in a room where his alpha energy sought to dominate. "Of course, Professor," he said, the picture of false contrition. "My apologies. I just hate to see potential underutilized." His gaze slid back to Eli for a fraction of a second, and the implied wasted hung in the air, more poisonous than his outright insult. The rest of the lecture passed in a haze of agony. Every pointed whisper from Leo's direction, every stifled laugh was a fresh puncture in the serene connection I shared with Eli. I felt his song dimming note by note, retreating into a place of defensive silence. My own thoughts were a chaotic storm. I wanted to vault over the lectern, to place myself physically between Leo's malice and Eli's light. I wanted to shake Leo, to scream the truth into his arrogant face. You have no idea what you're touching. You have no idea who he is to me. But I couldn't. The rules of our world and the deeper, more dangerous rules of our secret held me fast. A beta professor revealing a clandestine bond to an Omega student. It was unthinkable. It would cost me my career, my reputation, and worse, it would drag Eli into a scandal he was too gentle to survive. My protection had to remain a shadow, a silent vigil. When the bell finally rang, a jarring relief, I watched as Eli gathered his things with hurried, fumbling movements, desperate to escape. Leo, taking his time, leaned over and said something directly into Eli's ear. I didn't hear it, but I felt its effect, a violent, icy tremor through the bond, followed by a numbness so profound it was like a void opening in my own chest. Eli fled. Leo sauntered out with his friends, laughing at some private joke, the villain exiting stage left, utterly oblivious to the devastation left in his wake. I stood alone in the suddenly empty lecture hall, the echoes of their departure fading. The silence was a physical weight. I walked slowly to the third row, to Eli's seat. I placed my hand on the worn wood of the desk. It was still warm. Closing my eyes, I reached down the bond, sending a pulse of comfort, of unwavering steadiness, the emotional equivalent of a hand on a shoulder, a silent, "I am here. You are not alone." A faint, fragile trickle of warmth seeped back, not much, just enough to know he'd felt it, that the connection, though strained, still held. But the image that burned behind my eyes was Leo's smug, handsome face, the casual cruelty in his storm-gray eyes. He was playing a cruel game, bullying a quiet Omega for sport, for the affirmation of his own power. He didn't know he was trampling on the only thing that gave my life its color. He didn't know that every barb he threw at Eli was a knife twisting in a hidden bond he couldn't perceive. And he certainly didn't know that the beta professor he so easily dismissed, the one he saw as a neutral, powerless academic, was the enigma who had been secretly, completely bonded to his target for years. The fire of a new, terrifying resolve began to smolder beside the cold ache in my soul. Leo Vantis thought this was a simple power dynamic. He thought he was the top of this food chain. He was about to learn how wrong he was. The lecture was over. Now the real lesson would begin. Episode 2: The Anchor and the Storm. The echo of Leo's laughter haunted the corridors of my mind for days. Eli's song, usually a soft melody in the background of my existence, had become a fragile, fluttering thing. I felt his anxiety like a physical pressure in my own chest every morning as he prepared for class. My own composure was a fortress I rebuilt each dawn stone by stone, but the foundation was cracked. Every lecture was now a performance under a hostile spotlight, with Leo as my unwilling, arrogant co-star. The incident with the stolen work happened on a Thursday. The assignment was a short, critical analysis. From my desk at the front, I had watched Eli pour himself into it, his focus a bright, pure line of energy through our bond. He'd handed it in with a shy hope I could feel as my fingers brushed the paper. When I graded it that night, curled in the armchair of my quiet apartment, I felt a swell of pride. It was insightful, beautifully written. He'd earned his A. 2 days later, during a peer review session, Leo Vantis stood to present his analysis. His voice was confident, his delivery polished. and every single argument, every nuanced turn of phrase was Eli's. He'd plagiarized it wholesale, only swapping out the occasional word for a flashier synonym. The theft was so brazen it stole the air from my lungs. I felt the moment Eli recognized his own work. A jolt of pure, white-hot betrayal shot through the bond, followed by a crushing wave of helplessness. He sat perfectly still, a statue of quiet devastation, while Leo held court with stolen brilliance. The other students nodded, impressed. Rage, a deep, volcanic heat I rarely allowed myself, surged through me. This wasn't just bullying, this was annihilation. This was stealing Eli's voice, his intellect, the one part of himself he dared to offer to the world. The mask of Professor Thorne threatened to combust. I waited, my knuckles white on the edge of the lectern, until Leo finished with a smug, self-satisfied glance around the room. "A compelling perspective, Mr. Vantis," I said, and my voice was dangerously calm, a frozen lake over a raging current. "Unfortunately, it's not yours. Everyone, compare his arguments to the submission from Mr. Elios, which I graded 2 nights ago. The intellectual theft is, frankly, amateurish." The room erupted in a gasp of whispers. Leo's smirk vanished, replaced by a flash of shock, then a quick, defensive anger. Eli kept his head down, but I felt a spike of acute embarrassment from him. He hated being the center of this scandal, even as the victim. "My office, now, Mr. Vantis," I said, gathering my things. "The rest of you, begin the assigned reading." The walk to my office was silent, charged with a tension so thick I could taste it, copper and ozone, the scent of a coming storm. Leo followed, his presence a brooding, angry pressure at my back. I shut the door, the click of the latch feeling like the cocking of a gun. He didn't wait. "This is a misunderstanding," he began, that polished charm sliding back into place, though it didn't reach his stormy eyes. "Our ideas just converged. It happens in academic discourse." "Do not insult my intelligence," I said, rounding my desk, but not sitting. I needed the height, the scant authority it granted. "That wasn't convergence, Mr. Vantis. That was theft. You stole from the quietest student in the room because you thought he wouldn't fight back. You thought no one would notice." He crossed his arms, leaning against the doorframe, deliberately casual, a power play. "You seem very invested in Mr. Elios's work, Professor. Not playing favorites, are we? Betas are supposed to be so impartial." The jab was deliberate, meant to unbalance me, but he had no idea who he was truly speaking to. The bond inside me, usually a quiet hum, pulsed with a protective ferocity that sharpened my every sense. "My favoritism," I said, my words dropping like ice chips, "is reserved for students who do their own work. You have failed this assignment spectacularly, and if this happens again, it will be an academic integrity hearing." For a moment, his alpha arrogance held. Then something shifted. His gaze, which had been locked on mine with defiant challenge, flickered. It dropped, just for a second, to my neck, to the space above my collar where no bonding mark would ever show. His nostrils flared, almost imperceptibly. He was scenting the air. Confusion fractured his angry mask. He took a half-step forward into the room, his brow furrowing. "What is that?" he muttered, more to himself than to me. My blood ran cold. I knew what he was sensing. It was the residual, comforting signature of an Omega, his Omega, the unique, subtle scent of Eli that had seeped into my very being over years of secret bonding. a scent so familiar to me I was blind to its external trace. To a sharp alpha senses, especially one so attuned to Eli through his obsessive bullying, it must be a ghost, a haunting, familiar whisper on a beta he considered scentless. "Is there a problem, Mr. Vantis?" I asked, forcing my voice to stay steady, though my heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. He looked back up at me, the confusion in his eyes deepening into something like suspicion. The anger was still there, but it was now tangled with a primal, puzzled curiosity. "You smell," he started, then stopped, shaking his head as if to clear it. The alpha arrogance rushed back in, but it was thinner now, a veneer over his bewilderment. "Never mind, this is ridiculous. I'll contest the grade."
"You're welcome to try," I said, turning my back to him, a dismissal that was a risk but a necessity. I couldn't let him keep scenting me, couldn't let him puzzle out the impossible truth. "Now get out." I heard the door open and close. Only when I was sure he was gone did I let my shoulders slump, bracing my hands on the desk. The confrontation should have left me feeling victorious. I'd caught him, called him out, defended Eli. But all I could feel was a new, chilling fear. He'd sensed something. The invisible thread that connected me to Eli had, for a heartbeat, vibrated loud enough for the predator to hear. Leo Vantis didn't understand what he was chasing, but his instincts were now engaged on a deeper, more dangerous level. He was no longer just bullying a quiet Omega for sport. He was starting to hunt. And his first baffled clue was standing right in front of him, hiding in plain sight. The game had just changed, and the stakes had risen to a terrifying new height. Episode 3. The Ghost in the Static. A week passed in a taut, breathless silence. The plagiarized paper hung between Leo and me like a condemned man's sentence, an unspoken challenge. He'd made no move to contest the grade, but the air in the lecture hall had changed. His bullying of Eli had shifted. It was less blatant, less performative for his cronies. Now it was laser-focused, observant. He watched Eli with the intense, unnerving concentration of a scientist studying a baffling specimen. And he watched me. I felt those storm cloud eyes on me constantly, a prickling heat on the back of my neck during every lecture. He was trying to solve the riddle. The scent he'd caught in my office, the ghost of Eli's presence on a beta, had clearly not left him. It was a splinter in his alpha mind, a piece of static in a world he believed he understood perfectly. The breaking point came on a rainy Wednesday. Eli, still fragile from the public shaming, had been struggling with a complex theory we'd discussed. I saw his frustration in the tense line of his shoulders, felt it as a tangled knot of anxiety in the bond. As the other students filed out, chattering about weekend plans, he lingered, hovering near my lectern like a lost soul. "Professor Thorne?" His voice was so quiet, almost lost in the drumming of rain against the high windows. "I'm sorry to bother you, but the Durkheimian analysis, I think I've misunderstood the application." My heart, my traitorous heart, swelled with a painful tenderness. This was why we had bonded years ago. His brilliant, seeking mind, his courage in asking for guidance despite his shyness. "It's no bother, Eli," I said, and I let my professional warmth soften into something more genuine, something meant only for him. I moved around the desk, leaning over his open notebook. Our shoulders didn't touch, but our proximity was intimate in the empty room. I could smell the clean, faintly sweet scent of his distress, a scent that was as familiar to me as my own. I began to explain, pointing at the text, my voice dropping into the low, steady rhythm I used only with him, the rhythm of our bond. As I spoke, I sent soft, deliberate pulses of calm and reassurance down the invisible tether between us. "You are safe. You are capable. I am here." I felt the tangled knot of his anxiety begin to loosen, felt his focus sharpen, his song regaining a note of its former clarity. A small, grateful sigh escaped him. For a moment, the world was just us, a professor and his student, an enigma and his Omega, hidden in plain sight. The door to the lecture hall creaked open. We both looked up. Leo Vantis stood in the doorway, his backpack slung over one shoulder, water glistening in his dark hair. He'd forgotten a book, or so would be the pretext. His gaze swept the scene, Eli leaning slightly towards me, the vulnerable curve of his spine, me close enough to be in his personal space, my hand resting on the desk near his. The air in the room curdled. I felt it first from Leo, a hot, sudden surge of something that wasn't quite anger. It was possessive, confused, and fiercely territorial. His alpha instincts, already primed by the mysterious scent, now had a visual trigger. His jaw tightened. And then I felt it from Eli, a spike of pure, unadulterated fear, cold and sharp as a shard of ice. The calm I'd woven around him shattered, his song cut off into a silent scream. Leo's eyes, dark and churning, locked on me. The friendly, arrogant mask was gone, completely stripped away. What was left was raw, primal, and dangerously uncertain. He took a step into the room. "Am I interrupting something?" he asked, his voice deceptively smooth but with an undercurrent of a growl. Eli flinched, hastily gathering his things. "No, we're finished. Thank you, Professor." He practically fled, brushing past Leo with his head down, disappearing into the dim hallway, leaving me alone with the storm. Leo didn't move to let him pass easily. He watched Eli go, his gaze tracking him until he vanished. Then, slowly, he turned that gaze back on me. The silence stretched, filled only by the rain. He was assessing me, reevaluating every previous interaction with this new incendiary piece of information. "You're very hands-on with your tutoring, Professor," he said, walking further into the room. He stopped a few feet away, well inside the boundary of professional space, forcing me to tilt my head up to maintain eye contact. Another power play, but this one felt different. It wasn't just about dominance. It was about investigation. "It's called teaching, Mr. Vantis," I replied, forcing my own voice to remain neutral, though the bond was still ringing with Eli's fear. "I'm available to all my students who show initiative." A humorless smirk touched his lips. "He doesn't look like he initiates much of anything. He looks scared of his own shadow." He took another step closer. The scent of rain and something uniquely, aggressively alpha, cedar and ozone wrapped around me, but not of you. He was calm with you until I walked in. My blood turned to ice. He was seeing too much. "Perhaps because I don't go out of my way to intimidate him," I said, holding his gaze, refusing to back down. The bond inside me was a live wire, charged with a protective fury that mirrored his confused aggression. He leaned in just slightly, his nostrils flaring again. He was scenting the air between us, searching for that ghost. His confusion was a tangible thing in the room, mingling with his anger. "Why do you care?" The question was blunt, stripped of all pretense. "He's just another Omega, a weak one. Why does a beta professor get so invested?" The word invested hung in the air, heavy with accusation. He was circling the truth, a predator who'd found a trail but couldn't yet see the prey. "My investment is in seeing all my students succeed, free from harassment, something you seem determined to undermine. Now, if you'll excuse me." I moved to gather my own things, a clear dismissal. He didn't budge. He stood there, a wall of conflicted alpha energy, blocking the path between the desk and the door. For a long, breathless moment, he just stared at me, the puzzle pieces in his mind refusing to fit. The bully was still there, but he was sharing space with something else, a lost, frustrated alpha whose world was tilting on its axis. He finally stepped aside, but his voice followed me as I walked past him, a low, gravelly promise that was more threat than question. "This isn't over, Professor." I didn't look back. I walked out into the cool, rain-scented hallway, but his words echoed in the empty space he left behind. He was right. It wasn't over. He had seen the calm I could bring Eli. He had felt the wrongness of my scent. The fragile dynamic had shattered. Leo Vantis was no longer just a bully seeking an easy target. He was an alpha who had sensed a rival, a hidden, impossible rival, for the attention of the Omega he had marked as his own. The classroom was now a battlefield, and the prize was Eli's peace, and the secret I had kept for years was trembling, exposed in the stormy gaze of the one person who could destroy it all. Episode 4, The Distress Signal. A fragile, watchful tension settled over the following week. Leo didn't bully Eli in class. He watched. His gaze was a physical weight, constantly shifting between Eli's bowed head and my face at the lectern. It was a silent, predatory scrutiny, more unnerving than his open taunts. The lecture hall felt like a pressure cooker, the air thick with unasked questions and primal, conflicting energies. My own focus was split, a terrible division between delivering a lesson on social hierarchies and monitoring the silent, volatile standoff happening within them. Then it was Leo's turn to present. He'd chosen a topic on pack dynamics and outlier integration, a subject that felt like a deliberate provocation. He stood before the class, all coiled alpha grace, but his usual arrogant flair was subdued. He spoke with a strange, intense precision, his eyes frequently cutting to me, as if he were arguing a case directly before a judge. "The outlier," he said, his voice resonating in the quiet room, "is often perceived as a threat to the pack's harmony. But what if the threat isn't the outlier itself, but the pack's inability to recognize a bond that exists outside its understanding?" My pen stilled on my notepad. Was he theorizing or was he probing? I kept my expression impassive, but my heart thudded a warning rhythm against my ribs. "The bond," Leo continued, his stormy gaze locking onto mine, "can be invisible to those who refuse to look beyond surface designations. An alpha might not see it, the pack might deny it, but that doesn't mean it isn't real, or that it isn't profound." A strange heat flooded my cheeks. He was talking about us. He had to be. He was weaving a hypothetical around the very enigma he was trying to solve. I felt a tremor start deep within me, a seismic shift of panic. I needed to regain control, to redirect this dangerous discourse back to academia. I opened my mouth to interject, to steer the topic toward historical examples, but the words died in my throat. A bolt of pure, white-hot agony lanced through the bond. It wasn't emotional pain. This was physical, debilitating, and terrifyingly familiar. Bond sickness, a rare, severe flare that happened when an Omega, under extreme prolonged stress, experienced a catastrophic emotional disconnect. Eli's silent suffering, the constant fear, the pressure of Leo's watching eyes, it had all become too much. His body was now screaming through our connection. The world swam. The lecture hall tilted on its axis. A wave of nausea rolled through me, accompanied by a dizzying weakness that made my knees buckle. I gripped the edge of the lectern, my knuckles bone white. A cold sweat broke across my brow. I heard a gasp. My own or a student's, I couldn't tell. Through a gray, narrowing tunnel of vision, I saw Leo stop mid-sentence. His confident posture faltered. He was staring at me, his theoretical lecture forgotten. "Professor?" The word was sharp, laced with confusion that instantly bled into concern. The classroom was a blur of murmuring faces. I couldn't speak. The only thing in the universe was the screaming, silent distress signal pulsing from Eli. He was in crisis. He needed his anchor. He needed me. With a strength born of sheer desperation, I pushed away from the lectern. "Continue the reading," I stammered, my voice a ragged, unfamiliar thing. I didn't wait for a response. I fled, the sound of my own unsteady footsteps echoing in the sudden silence behind me. I didn't go to my office. I followed the bond, a desperate homing beacon pulling me through the sterile hallways toward the old secluded seminar room in the East Wing, a quiet place Eli often used to study between classes. The pain in the bond was a compass needle pointing true north to his suffering.
I shoved the door open. The sight that greeted me shattered what was left of my composure. Eli was curled on the floor between two rows of desks, shivering violently despite the room's warmth. His skin was clammy and pale, his breathing a series of rapid, shallow hitches. The bond sickness was radiating from him in visible waves of distress. He whimpered, a broken sound that tore at my soul. "Eli!" I breathed, rushing to him. I dropped to my knees, the world narrowing to his feverish face. I didn't hesitate. Professional boundaries were ash. I pulled him gently against me, cradling his head to my chest. My hands, trembling, framed his face. "Look at me. Just breathe. Follow me." I began to take deep, deliberate breaths, pushing them down the bond like a lifeline, pouring every ounce of calm, of stability, of unwavering presence that I possessed into the chaotic storm of his system. "I'm here. You are not alone. I have you." Slowly, so slowly, his trembling began to subside. His ragged breaths started to sync with mine. The sharp edge of the pain blunted, replaced by a deep, exhausted ache. His song, which had been a shriek of static, softened into a weak, thready pulse of recognition and relief. He clung to the front of my shirt, his fingers clutching the fabric like a drowning man. I didn't hear the door open. I was too immersed in the act of salvation, in the sacred ritual of anchoring my Omega. But I felt it. A new presence, a shockwave of potent, stunned alpha energy flooding the room. I looked up, over Eli's head. Leo Vantis stood in the doorway, frozen. His backpack was gone. He must have followed me. His face was a canvas of utter, world-breaking shock. All the arrogance, the suspicion, the theoretical curiosity, it was wiped clean. His eyes were wide, his lips parted. He was staring at the scene before him, me holding a violently ill Eli with an intimacy that spoke of years, not moments, holding him not as a professor, but as a bonded partner. His gaze traveled from Eli's trusting, feverish form curled against me, to my hands on his face, to the absolute, unguarded devastation and devotion on my own features, a look I had never, ever let the world see. The protective, possessive anger I expected from him didn't come. Instead, his expression crumbled into something raw and profoundly lost. He saw it. He finally saw the truth, not in theory, but in devastating practice. He saw the anchor holding the Omega steady in the storm, and he saw with dawning, horrifying clarity that the storm, him. For a long, silent moment, we just stared at each other over Eli's head, the enigma professor and the alpha bully, with the truth of our tangled, painful triad laid bare on the cold floor between us. Then, without a word, Leo took a stumbling step backward. The confusion in his eyes had crystallized into a kind of terrified understanding. He turned and disappeared, leaving the door gaping open, the echo of his retreat the only sound in the room besides Eli's slowing breaths. The secret was out, not in words, but in a truth more powerful than any confession. Leo Vantis now knew, and the world as we all knew it was over. Episode 5. The Triad Dawn. For 3 days, there was only silence. Not the quiet of before, thick with tension and unspoken threats. This was the hollow, breath-held silence after a detonation. The seminar room moment hung in the air of my life, a suspended crystalline truth. Eli, weakened but stable, stayed home, our bond a steady, convalescent hum. I taught my classes to a conspicuously empty seat where Leo usually held court. His absence was louder than any disruption he'd ever caused.
The knock on my office door on the fourth evening was soft, inevitable. "Enter." Leo stepped inside and closed the door with a quiet, final click. He looked ravaged. The arrogant posture was gone, replaced by a weary slump. Shadows pooled under his storm cloud eyes, which held none of their former challenge. He looked lost, young. He stood just inside the room, making no move to sit, his hands clenched at his sides. The air thickened, saturated with the scent of him, rain, cedar, and now overwhelmingly a bitter, acrid guilt. "Where is he?" His voice was a ruin, scraped raw from sleepless nights or screaming, I couldn't tell. "He's home. He's safe." I kept my voice neutral, a professor's tone, but the bond in my chest was a frantic bird beating against my ribs. The connection to Eli flared with soft, anxious warmth at the sound of Leo's voice, a reflex that clearly confused him too. Leo flinched at the word safe, as if it were an indictment. His gaze, lost and searching, swept over my desk, the shelves, finally anchoring on my face. He was looking for the monster, the rival, the trickster. He found only the man who held his secret. "What you were doing," he began, his voice trembling with the effort to keep it level. He swallowed, the line of his throat working. "On the floor, holding him. That wasn't just a professor being kind." He was begging for a lie, for a simple explanation that would put his world back in order. I couldn't give it to him. "No, Leo," I said, the use of his first name deliberate, stripping away the last pretense of formality. "It wasn't." He took a stumbling step forward, drawn by the gravity of the confession. "The scent on you," he whispered, the words filled with a kind of horrified awe. "In your office that day. It's him. It's in your skin, in your clothes. It's part of you." He took another step, and another, until he stood before my desk, a supplicant before an altar. "You're not just his protector. You're his anchor, the thing holding him to the earth." The word, his own theoretical word made devastatingly real, hung between us. I saw the exact moment the final, terrible piece clicked into place in his mind. His breath hitched. Yes. The affirmation was a guillotine. A low, wounded sound, half groan, half sob escaped him. He braced his hands on the edge of my desk, his head bowing between his shoulders as if carrying an unbearable weight. And I was... He couldn't say it. Every time, every single time I made him flinch, every time I stole his voice, you felt it. It wasn't a question. It was the realization of a new exquisite form of torture. "Every second," I confirmed, my own voice softening, the truth a release of poison I'd carried for weeks. "His pain is my pain. His fear, my fear. You weren't just bullying a quiet student, Leo. You were flaying the other half of my soul open, and I had to stand there and lecture about Durkheim." He jerked upright, recoiling from the desk as if it were white-hot. The raw horror on his face was complete. The intellectual understanding was one thing, the visceral, emotional comprehension was another. He had been, unintentionally, torturing me. The alpha who believed in strength and dominance had been brutally attacking the one person who was, by design, an unbreakable support system. The paradox shattered him. Then his expression began to change again. The horror melted, not into anger, but into a desperate, aching need. His stormy eyes traced the lines of my face, the column of my throat, my hands, the hands that had soothed and steadied. A profound, humbling understanding dawned. "You're the reason," he breathed, the words filled with a profound, humbling understanding that was utterly foreign on him.
You're the reason he's still whole. I tried so hard to break him, to make him see me, but he didn't shatter. He had a fortress I couldn't touch." His gaze lifted back to mine, blazing with desperate clarity. "It was you. All along, it was you." He moved then, not with aggression, but with the magnetic pull of a lost thing finding its north. He circled the desk, his presence a wave of heat and that now familiar penitent scent. He stopped behind my chair. I didn't turn. I sat utterly still, every nerve ending alight. I could feel the warmth of his body just inches from my back. "All this time," he murmured, his voice a low, resonant vibration that seeped into my bones. His breath stirred the hair at my nape, raising goosebumps along my skin. I thought I wanted to see him submit, to own his fear. He leaned closer, his lips nearly brushing the shell of my ear. A shiver racked my frame. But that wasn't it. I wanted to be the one he looked to, the one he needed. His confession was a hot, intimate brand. And he needs you. His hand rose, hovering beside my neck, near the scent gland no visible mark would ever claim. This calm, this absolute certainty he has when he's with you, this is what I was chasing. It's in you, for him. His breath broke on a ragged edge. Can you feel it? What I'm feeling now? For him? For this? I could. Oh God, I could. The bond, which had been a private duet between Eli and me, was now a resonant chamber. Leo's raw, chaotic frequency, a torrent of guilt, longing, possessiveness, and a surrendering awe, wasn't just in the room, it was vibrating through the bond itself, echoing off the connection I shared with Eli. It was overwhelming, a third instrument joining the symphony, dissonant and beautiful and terrifying all at once. Eli's essence in the bond, sensing the shift from miles away, pulsed with a soft, curious warmth, not fear. He was listening. "Yes," I breathed, the word a surrender of its own. A tremor ran through him, a quake starting at his core. The last vestige of his defiance crumbled into dust. He didn't walk around a chair, he sank to his knees beside it, bringing himself to my level. A proud alpha, brought low not by force, but by the devastating weight of truth and a need greater than pride. He didn't touch me, he just looked at me, his face open, ruined and utterly beautiful in its honesty. "I don't know what this is," he admitted, the confession raw and scraped bare. "I don't know how an alpha, a beta, and an omega fit. It doesn't make sense. But I know I can't walk away from it. From him." His eyes, glistening, searched mine, pleading for a map out of the wilderness. "From you. Tell me what to do. Please, Aris. Tell me how to fix this." The sound of my name on his lips in that broken voice undid me. The world, with all its rules and designations, shrunk to this space between us. I reached out. My hand, steady despite the storm inside me, cupped the strong line of his jaw. His skin was fever hot. At the contact, a full-body shudder racked him, a dam breaking. A single perfect tear overflowed and traced a path through the weariness on his cheek. He turned his face into my palm, his lips pressing a desperate, grateful kiss against my skin. The intimacy of it was more profound than any passion. Electricity arced from the point of contact through my entire system. In that touch, I felt the triangulation complete. Leo's penitent hunger flowing into me, my steadfast calm anchoring him, and through our shared connection, Eli's gentle, accepting peace weaving us together. It was a feedback loop of healing, a circuit of terrifying, sublime potential. "You start," I said, my thumb stroking the damp trail on his cheek, "by coming home with me to see him, not as a bully, not as a rival, but as you are now, and you let the bond guide you. It will show you the way." He nodded against my hand, a barely perceptible movement. When he opened his eyes, the storm was still there, but it was no longer destructive. It was the churning, powerful energy of a new beginning, ready to be channeled, to be claimed. "Take me home," he whispered, his voice thick with promise. The classroom, the titles, the past, they all dissolved. What remained was the undeniable magnetic truth of 3 hearts, a bond no longer secret, but finally, fully shared, beating in a messy, perfect, and newly forged rhythm. The story of professor and student, Alpha and Omega, was over. Ours was just beginning to thrum with life. Epilogue. 1 year later, the scent of old books in my office is now layered with cedar, sunshine, and peace. Leo's head rests in my lap as he studies, my fingers carding through his hair. Across from us, Eli reads aloud, his voice steady, his song a vibrant, joyful melody in our shared soul. The bond is no longer a secret tether, but a living, breathing thing between 3. It hums with Leo's protective devotion, Eli's creative light, and my steadfast anchor. We are professor, entrepreneur, artist. We are Alpha, Omega, Beta. We are finally home. And so the final page turns on Leo, Eli, and Aris. Their world, once built on secrets and pain, now thrives on a bond rewritten with understanding and a fierce triplicate love. Their story lives in the space where an enigma became an anchor and an alpha's storm found its calm. If this journey moved you, please leave a rating or review. It truly helps new listeners find their next story. Tell me, what moved you most? Was it the secret bond, the raw redemption, or the moment 3 shattered pieces finally clicked into one perfect whole?